The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, and it changed everything. It came through the Deep Space Relay Network, encrypted in Galhari diplomatic code, and landed on the desk of every major government on Earth within the hour. The Galhari Dominion, the largest and most aggressive alien empire humanity had ever encountered, was requesting a peace summit. After 2 years of border attacks, burned colonies, and dead settlers floating in the vacuum of space, they wanted to talk. But the message was not kind. It was not an invitation between equals. It was a summons. The kind of message a king sends to a peasant when he is feeling generous enough not to simply crush them. Baek Jisok read it 3 times in his office at the Unified Council headquarters in Seoul. He was Earth's senior diplomatic attaché, a thin man in his late 40s, with sharp eyes and a calm voice that never rose even when the world was falling apart around him. He had spent 20 years negotiating with alien species, and he knew exactly what this message was. It was a trap, dressed in silk. The key line was near the end. "Bring your finest hunter," it read, "that our champion may take their measure." In Galhari culture, this was a dominance ritual. They did not see peace talks the way humans did. For the Galhari, peace was something the strong gave to the weak, after proving they could destroy them. They wanted humanity to send a warrior, so their own champion, a creature called a Valkai, could break him in front of an audience. After that, the Galhari would dictate terms, and humanity would accept them with a bowed head. That was the plan, at least. Jisok brought the message to the full council that afternoon. The room was tense. Generals argued with diplomats. Scientists argued with politicians. Everyone had an opinion, and most of those opinions were loud. "We send a negotiation team, professionals, people trained in alien diplomacy. They don't want diplomats," Jisok said quietly. "They want a hunter. If we send suits and handshakes, they will see it as weakness, and the talks will be over before they begin." "So what do you suggest?" the council chair asked. Jisok placed a single file on the table. Kang Do-hyun. The room went silent. Everyone knew the name. Kang Do-hyun had been the commander of Earth's Special Operations Division during the First Colonial Wars. He had fought on 6 different worlds, led missions that were still classified, and earned a reputation among alien intelligence networks that bordered on myth. The Galhari had a file on him. So did the Tarani Federation, the Melkari Syndicate, and half a dozen other species. They all called him different things, but the translation was always the same: the Tiger. He had retired 3 years ago, moved to a small house on Jeju Island, off the southern coast of Korea. He grew vegetables. He fished. He did not answer calls from the military. But Jisok was not military, and the message he sent was not an order. It was a simple question. "The Galhari are killing settlers on the frontier. They have summoned us. Will you come?" Do-hyun's reply came 6 hours later. Just one word. "Where?" Jisok flew to Jeju the next morning. He found Do-hyun in his garden, pulling weeds. The man was 53 years old, with gray at his temples and hands that were rough from soil and sun. He did not look like the most dangerous human alive. He looked like someone's quiet father. Which, as it turned out, he was. "I have one condition," Do-hyun said as they sat on his porch, drinking barley tea. "My daughter comes with me." Jisok blinked. "Yuna?" She was 24, a combat xenobiologist who had graduated top of her class at the Seoul Institute of Alien Sciences. She had done fieldwork on 3 different alien worlds, studying the biology and behavior of non-human species. She was brilliant. She was also not a soldier. "The Galhari are expecting a warrior," Jisok said carefully. "They are bringing a Valkai, a creature that was literally engineered to kill. Why would we bring a scientist?" Do-hyun looked at him with those calm, dark eyes that had made alien commanders lose sleep. "They asked for a hunter," he said. "A tiger hunts alone. That is dangerous enough. But a tiger with a cub to protect?" He paused, and took a sip of his tea. That is something the galaxy has never seen. Jisok studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. I will inform the council. 3 days later, they boarded the ESS Baiko, a diplomatic escort warship named after the White Tiger of Korean legend. The ship was fast, well-armed, and crewed by some of Earth's finest officers. Its captain was Han Sumi, a woman in her early 40s, with a reputation for being calm under fire and absolutely ruthless when provoked. Sumi briefed the crew as they entered warp space. This is officially a peace mission, she said, standing at the front of the bridge with her hands clasped behind her back. Unofficially, every intelligence agency on Earth believes the Galhari are using this summit as a stage. They want to humiliate us, establish dominance, and then dictate terms that would reduce humanity to a client species. She paused. We are not going to let that happen. The journey took 4 days. During that time, Do-hyun barely spoke. He spent hours in the ship's small training room, moving through combat forms with a slowness that was almost meditative. His movements were quiet and precise, like water flowing over stone. She locked herself in the ship's research lab, pulling every file Earth had on Valkai physiology. She studied their skeletal structure, their nervous system, their sensory organs. She mapped their pressure points, their joint weaknesses, their reaction speeds. She built a complete biological profile of the creature her father would face, and she did it with the focused intensity of someone defusing a bomb. On the 4th day, the Baiko dropped out of warp. The Galhari neutral station hung in the darkness ahead of them, a massive structure of black metal and sharp angles, orbiting a dead star that gave off no light. It looked like a fortress built by something that had never known warmth. And docked beside it, sleek and predatory, was a Valkai warship. Sumi's voice came over the intercom, steady and clear. All hands, we have arrived. Diplomatic team, prepare for departure. Do-hyun stood at the observation window, looking at the station. Yuna came to stand beside him. She said nothing. He said nothing. They just looked at the darkness together. Father and daughter, the tiger and his cub, standing at the edge of something that would change humanity's place in the galaxy forever. Then Do-hyun turned and walked toward the shuttle bay. Yuna followed. The shuttle docked with a heavy clang that echoed through the metal walls. The door hissed open, and the air that rushed in was cold and smelled like iron and something else, something organic and old, like dried blood in a cave. Kang Do-hyun stepped out first, then Yuna, then Jisok and 4 escort officers from the Baiko, unarmed as the Galhari protocol required. They stood in a narrow docking corridor lit by pale blue lights that hummed faintly above them. A Galhari guard was waiting. It stood over 7 feet tall, with dark green chitin covering its body like natural armor. It had 4 arms, 2 large and 2 smaller, and compound eyes that reflected the light like wet glass. It said nothing. It simply turned and began walking, expecting them to follow. They followed. The corridor led into a long hallway, and that was where the first test began. The walls on both sides were lined with trophies, not the kind humans hung on walls. These were pieces of other species. Skulls mounted on metal plates, claws preserved in clear resin, flags and banners taken from conquered worlds, torn and stained. Each trophy had a small plaque beneath it, with writing in the Galhari language, naming the species and the date they were defeated. It was a hallway of the dead, a museum of dominance, and every visiting delegation had to walk through it to reach the summit chamber. The message was clear. Look at what we have done. Look at what we can do to you. Jisok kept his face perfectly neutral. The escort officers walked with stiff backs and forward eyes. Yuna looked at the trophies with the focused attention of a scientist examining specimens. She was not horrified. She was studying. Do-hyun did not look at the walls at all. He walked straight ahead with his hands behind his back, as if he were taking a stroll through a garden. His calm was louder than any scream. The hallway opened into the grand atrium, and the scale of it hit them like a wave. The room was enormous, hundreds of meters across, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. The walls were carved from black stone, and the floor was polished to a mirror shine. Hundreds of Galhari observers filled the elevated galleries on all sides, looking down at the central floor, where the delegation now stood. And at the far end, raised on a platform 3 meters above the ground, sat Torvon. The supreme mediator of the Galhari Dominion was impressive even by alien standards. He was 8 feet tall, broader than any 2 humans standing side by side, with chitin that was darker than the others, almost black. His 4 arms rested on the sides of a throne carved from a single piece of stone. His compound eyes glittered as he watched the humans approach. Standing beside the throne, motionless as a statue, was Dren. Yuna saw him and felt her breath catch for just a moment before she controlled it. The Valkai was everything the files had described, and worse. He stood over 7 feet tall, but unlike the Galhari, he was not insectoid. He was something else entirely. A predator built from the ground up. His body was covered in dark, scaled hide that looked thick enough to stop a blade. His arms were long, ending in hands with retractable claws that, even sheathed, were clearly visible as ridges beneath the skin. His head was broad and low, with deep-set eyes that tracked movement with the patience of something that had never needed to rush a kill. Earth has answered our summons. He looked at Jisuk first. You are the speaker? Jisuk bowed slightly. I am Baek Jisuk, diplomatic attaché of Earth's Unified Council. I carry the authority to negotiate on behalf of humanity. Torvon's mandibles clicked. A gesture Jisuk knew was the Galhari equivalent of dismissal. Speakers are tools, Torvon said. They carry words, not weight. His eyes moved past Jisuk and settled on Do-hyun. Are you the hunter they sent? Every pair of eyes in the atrium turned to the quiet man in the plain black uniform. Do-hyun did not answer immediately. He looked up at Torvon on his elevated throne. He looked at Dren, standing like a living shadow. He looked at the galleries full of Galhari observers, waiting to see a lesser species bow. Then he smiled. It was a small smile, calm and warm, the kind a father might give when his child asked a silly question. The Galhari translators processed it and flagged an error. They could not categorize the emotion. It was not fear. It was not aggression. It was not submission. It was something they had no word for. I am the father, Do-hyun said. The hunting is what I do on the side. Silence. Torvon stared at him. The observers in the galleries shifted uncomfortably. Even Dren's eyes narrowed slightly, the first movement he had made since the humans entered. Torvon's gaze moved to Yuna, standing just behind her father. And this one? A child? You bring children to a summit of powers? She is my daughter, Do-hyun said, and she is exactly where she needs to be. Torvon made the clicking sound again, louder this time. Earth amuses me. Very well. The formalities will proceed. Tomorrow, the right of measure will determine the standing of your species at this table. Your hunter will face our champion. He gestured one massive arm toward Dren. Until then, you may rest in the quarters we have provided. Try to be comfortable. It may be your last chance. The humans were escorted to a wing of the station that had been converted into guest quarters. The rooms were large, but bare, with hard surfaces and cold air, designed for Galhari bodies, not human comfort. It was another small act of dominance. Jisok gathered the team in the central room. They intend to humiliate us tomorrow. The right of measure is not a fair fight. It is a performance. Dren wins, the Galhari prove their dominance, and we negotiate from our knees. Then we do not let Dren win, Dohyun said simply. He is a Valkai, Jisok said, engineered for combat. Faster than any human, stronger than any human, with natural armor and claws that can cut through ship hull plating. Dohyun looked at his daughter. Yuna pulled out a small datapad and placed it on the table. On it was everything she had built during the 4-day journey, a complete map of Valkai biology, every weakness, every blind spot, every nerve cluster and joint that could be exploited. He is fast, she said, but his turning speed is limited by his hip structure. He is strong, but his elbow joints have a narrow range that makes him vulnerable at close range. His armor is thick on the chest and back, but thin at the throat, under the arms, and behind the knees. His sensory organs are tuned for detecting fear responses in prey, elevated heartbeat, stress hormones, panic movement. She looked at her father. If you do not show fear, his instincts will not know what to do with you. Dohyun studied the data for a long moment. Then he nodded. That night, while the station slept in its cold, artificial darkness, Yuna sat alone in her room, running the data one more time. A soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find a young Galhari standing in the corridor, smaller than the others, with lighter chitin and nervous eyes. I am Lyra, the alien said in careful English. I am a translator. I should not be here. Then why are you? Yuna asked. Lyra's smaller arms pressed together, a gesture of anxiety. Because Torvald does not want peace. The right of measure is meant to end in death. Dren has never lost. He has never been told to stop. If your father enters that arena, Torvald expects him to die. Yuna studied the young translator for a long, quiet moment. Then she said, Thank you for telling me. What will you do? Lyra asked. Yuna closed her datapad and looked at her with steady eyes. We will walk into that arena anyway. Lyra stared at her as if she were looking at something she had never seen before, a prey species that did not run. Then she turned and disappeared into the dark corridor. Yuna closed the door and went to find her father. She told him everything. Dohyun listened without surprise, as if he had expected it from the moment they received the summons. Good, he said quietly. Then we do not have to be polite. The arena was a circle of polished black stone, 50 meters across, surrounded by rising galleries that were packed with Galhari observers. Hundreds of them sat in their seats, their compound eyes reflecting the cold white light that poured down from above. There was a low hum of conversation, the clicking and buzzing of the Galhari language, but beneath it was something else. Excitement, hunger. They had come to watch a lesser species learn its place. Torvald sat in the highest gallery, directly facing the arena floor, flanked by his advisors. His posture was relaxed. He had seen Dren fight many times. He knew how it ended. Jisiok, Yuna, and the human escort officers were given seats in a small section near the floor, set lower than the Galhari galleries. Another dominance detail. Yuna sat with her hands in her lap, her datapad hidden in her jacket. Her heart was steady. A deep horn sounded, and the arena fell silent. Dren entered from the far side. He walked slowly, each step deliberate, his claws fully extended for the first time. They were as long as a human forearm, curved and dark, catching the light like polished bone. His scaled hide seemed to absorb the brightness around him, making him look like a shadow given form. He reached the center of the arena and stopped. Then he roared. The sound was not just loud, it was something that reached into the body, vibrating in the chest and the bones. It was the sound of 1,000,000 years of predatory evolution, compressed into one moment. Several of the human escort officers flinched. Even Jisok's jaw tightened. Yuna did not move. The Galhari audience responded with their own sounds, clicks and stamps that echoed through the galleries like applause. Then it was time. Kang Do-hyun entered from the opposite side of the arena. He walked at a normal pace, unhurried, his hands behind his back. He wore his plain black uniform with no armor, no helmet, and no visible weapon. His boots made quiet sounds on the polished stone. Compared to the massive, armored predator waiting for him, he looked like a man who had taken a wrong turn on his way to a tea house. The Galhari audience went quiet, in a different way now. Confused. Some made clicking sounds that Yuna recognized as amusement. Others tilted their heads, trying to understand what they were seeing. Torvan leaned forward slightly. A thin smile of satisfaction spread across his face. This would be quick. Do-hyun reached his position, 10 meters from Dren, and stopped. He looked at the Valkai without expression. Then he took his hands from behind his back, opened them, showing they were empty, and placed them at his sides. A Galhari official stood and announced the rules. The right of measure would continue until one fighter was unable to stand, yielded, or was killed. There were no weapons allowed beyond the natural body. The official paused and looked at Do-hyun with what might have been pity. A second horn sounded. Dren moved. He was fast, impossibly, terrifyingly fast for something that large. He closed the 10-meter gap in less than 2 seconds, his claws leading, aimed at Do-hyun's chest in a strike that had opened the rib cages of a dozen species before. Do-hyun was not there. He moved to the left, not with speed that matched Dren's, but with timing that made speed unnecessary. He shifted his weight a half-second before the strike arrived, as if he had known exactly when and where it would come. The claws cut through empty air. Dren's momentum carried him forward, and Do-hyun was already behind him. The audience went silent. Dren spun, fast, but his hip rotation was limited, just as Yuna had predicted. Do-hyun was already moving, circling to the Valkai's weak side, staying close. Too close for those long arms to get full leverage. Dren struck again. A sweeping claw aimed at Do-hyun's head. Do-hyun ducked under it, and drove a precise strike into the soft tissue under Dren's left arm, exactly where Yuna's biological map had marked a nerve cluster. Dren grunted, his left arm spasming for just a moment. The Galhari audience leaned forward as one. What followed was not a fight in the way the Galhari understood fights. There was no clash of power, no roaring, no blood-soaked display of dominance. It was something far more unsettling. It was a lesson. Dren attacked again and again. He was savage, relentless, using every weapon his engineered body gave him, claws, elbows, the heavy ridge of his skull. Any single blow would have killed a human instantly, but none of them landed. Do-hyun moved like water around stone. He did not try to match strength. He redirected. He sidestepped. He used Dren's own force against him, guiding those massive arms past his body by centimeters, tapping precise strikes into the Valkai's weak points as he passed. Every touch was calculated, targeting the joints, the nerve clusters, the thin-skinned gaps in the natural armor that Yuna had mapped in her research. It was not superhuman. That was the terrifying part. Do-hyun was not faster than Dren. He was not stronger. He was simply better. He read the Valkai's movements the way a scholar reads a book, seeing what came next before it happened, understanding the patterns built into Dren's engineered instincts. Because that was what humans did. They studied, they learned, they adapted. They watched you try to kill them, and they figured out how you worked. Dren was growing frustrated. He had never faced prey like this. His instincts were screaming at him, but the signals were wrong. His sensory organs were built to detect fear, the racing heartbeat, the stress chemicals, the desperate movements of something trying to escape. But Do-hyun's heartbeat was steady. His breathing was calm. His movements were not the movements of prey. They were the movements of a predator who had chosen not to kill yet. That realization hit Dren somewhere deep, in a place beneath his training and his engineering. And for the first time in his life, the Valkai hesitated. Do-hyun saw it instantly. Dren lunged one more time, committing everything to a downward strike that would have driven his claws through a steel plate. Do-hyun stepped to the side, caught the Valkai's outstretched arm, and used the creature's own weight and momentum to twist him off balance. It was a throw that used physics and leverage rather than strength, and it sent 7 feet of engineered predator crashing to the arena floor with a sound that shook the galleries. Before Dren could rise, Do-hyun placed one boot on his throat. Not hard enough to crush, just enough to hold. The arena was completely silent, not even the sound of breathing. Torvald's 4 hands were clenched so tightly that his chiton creaked. Yuna sat in her seat with her hands still in her lap. Her face was still, but inside her chest, her heart was singing. Do-hyun looked down at the Valkai beneath his foot. Dren's deep-set eyes stared up at him, wide, not with fear, but with something he had never experienced before. Confusion, awe, the inability to understand what had just happened. Do-hyun spoke. His voice was quiet, but the arena's translation systems carried it to every corner of the room, to every Galhari ear, to Torvald's throne, to the record. "You are fast," he said. "You are strong, but you were built to kill." He paused and held Dren's gaze. "I was built to choose." He lifted his boot from Dren's throat. Then he did something that no species in the history of the Galhari Dominion had ever done to a defeated Valkai. He offered his hand. The silence stretched. A second. 2. 5. The entire arena held its breath. Dren looked at the hand. He looked at the human's face. He looked at the hand again. Then slowly, the Valkai reached up and took it. Do-hyun pulled him to his feet. They stood face to face for a moment, the engineered killer and the quiet human who had chosen not to kill. Something passed between them that the translators could not capture and the Galhari could not understand. Up in the highest gallery, Torvald stood abruptly and declared a recess. His voice was sharp and too loud. The observers began to leave, murmuring in confused, clicking tones. Torvald turned to his chief advisor, and his voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. "Activate the contingency. If we cannot break them in the arena, we will break them in the dark." Below, Do-hyun walked back to his daughter. Yuna stood and looked at him, and for a moment, just a moment, the retired soldier and the young scientist were not diplomats, or warriors, or symbols. They were just a father and his girl, and she was proud of him. The station's night cycle was a lie. There was no sun to set, no sky to darken. The lights simply dimmed by 30%, and the corridors grew quieter as the Galhari retreated to their chambers. But the cold stayed. The cold never left this place. Yuna was not sleeping. She sat cross-legged on the hard Galhari bed in her quarters, her data pad balanced on her knee, running the station's environmental sensor feeds through a decryption program she had written during the journey. The Galhari thought their systems were secure. They were wrong. Human codebreakers had been picking apart Galhari encryption for years, and Yuna had access to the best tools Earth's intelligence agencies could provide. She was watching heat signatures move through the station. Most of them were Galhari, easy to identify by their body temperature and movement patterns. They moved slowly during the night cycle, drifting toward their rest chambers in predictable ways. But 4 signatures were different. They were warmer, they moved faster, and they were moving together, in a tight formation through the lower corridors of the station, heading directly toward the diplomatic wing. "Valkai, Yuna's fingers stopped on the datapad. She watched the 4 signatures for 30 seconds, tracking their route. They were not patrolling. They were not wandering. They were hunting. She stood, crossed the room in 4 steps, and opened the door to her father's quarters. Do-hyun was lying on his back, with his eyes open. He had not been sleeping either. He never slept deeply in hostile territory. 4 incoming, Yuna said. Do-hyun sat up. He did not ask questions. He did not ask how she knew. He simply stood, rolled his shoulders once, and said, "How long?" 3 minutes, maybe less. Do-hyun looked at his daughter. For a moment, just a flicker, something crossed his face that she had rarely seen. Not worry. Kang Do-hyun did not worry. It was something deeper. The look of a tiger who knows that this time, the cub is in the fight too. "Stay behind me," he said. "No," Yuna said. She reached into her bag and pulled out 2 things. A compact medical scanner, which was the only piece of equipment the Galhari had not confiscated, because they considered medical tools irrelevant, and a thin metal rod that was officially listed as a structural support for her research equipment. Do-hyun looked at the rod. Then he looked at his daughter. Then, despite everything, the corner of his mouth twitched. 2 and 2, he asked. 2 and 2, she agreed. They moved into the corridor together, silent as shadows. The diplomatic wing was a long hallway, with rooms on both sides, and a single entry point at the far end. Do-hyun positioned himself near the entry. Yuna moved to a junction point, halfway down the hall where the corridor turned, creating a blind corner. Then they waited. The Valkyrie came quietly, quieter than creatures that large had any right to be. They came on bare, clawed feet, their movements precise and coordinated, the movements of trained killers on a mission. Their claws were extended. They wore no armor. This was meant to be quick and silent. The first 2 came through the entrance and found Do-hyun standing in the middle of the corridor, waiting for them. They hesitated for just a fraction of a second. They had been told the human would be sleeping. They had been told this would be easy. Do-hyun moved first. He closed the distance before the lead Valkyrie could react, driving a strike into the creature's throat, targeting the thin skin beneath the jaw, where the neural pathway was closest to the surface. The Valkyrie staggered, choking, and Do-hyun was already spinning past it, putting the first attacker between himself and the second. The second Valkyrie lunged, claws slashing. Do-hyun used the narrow corridor to his advantage. These creatures were built for open combat, wide swings and overwhelming force. In a space this tight, their reach became a problem. Their claws scraped the walls and ceiling, throwing sparks, but missing flesh. Do-hyun fought the way he had always fought, patient, precise, efficient. He did not waste energy on anything that was not necessary. Every movement had a purpose. Every strike found a weakness. He used the walls, the floor, the low ceiling, turning the environment into a weapon. Meanwhile, the other 2 Valkyrie had taken a different route. They came through an access tunnel that opened into the corridor junction where Yuna was waiting. They saw her and dismissed her in the same instant. She was small. She was young. She was human. She was nothing. They were wrong. The first Valkyrie came around the corner fast, claws leading. Yuna did not try to block it. She dropped low, under the swing, and drove the metal rod into the soft joint behind the creature's knee. The rod punched through the thin membrane between the armor plates, with a sound like tearing cloth. The Valkyrie's leg buckled, and it crashed to one knee. Yuna was already moving. She rolled past the falling creature, came up behind the second one, and jammed her medical scanner against the gap between its neck plates. She had modified the device during the journey. A medical scanner was designed to send low-frequency electromagnetic pulses to map internal organ structures. At full power, directed into the central nervous cluster of a Valkyrie, It became something else entirely. She pressed the activation button. The pulse hit the Valkai's nervous system like a lightning bolt. The creature's entire body locked up, every muscle firing at once, and it dropped to the floor like a falling tree. It was not dead. It would recover in an hour. But for now, it was out. The first Valkai, the one with the damaged knee, was trying to rise. It turned toward Yuna, its deep-set eyes blazing with rage, and it swung one massive arm at her head. She ducked. The claws passed over her hair, close enough to feel the wind. She came up inside its reach, grabbed the rod still embedded in its knee, and twisted. The Valkai screamed, a horrible, grinding sound, and collapsed. Yuna stepped back, breathing hard, her hands shaking just slightly, and watched it fall. Down the corridor, the sounds of her father's fight had stopped. She turned and saw Do-hyun walking toward her, stepping over two unconscious Valkai. He had a shallow cut on his left forearm where a claw had grazed him. Otherwise, he was untouched. He looked at the two Valkai on the floor in front of his daughter. He looked at the modified medical scanner in her hand. He looked at her face, flushed and steady and fierce. "Are you hurt?" he asked. No. Something moved in his eyes. Not surprise. He had always known what she was capable of. It was something quieter than surprise. Something that looked a lot like the feeling a man has when he realizes that the thing he built, the thing he raised and protected and taught, has become something greater than he ever planned. Pride. The deep, unshakable kind. "Good," he said. Aboard the Beho, Captain Hansumi had been monitoring the diplomatic wing through the shuttle's remote sensors. The moment the fight began, she had powered up the ship's weapons array and targeted the station's primary power core, shield generators, and command center. Her voice was the calm of deep water over sharp rocks. "Supreme Mediator, 4 Valkai assassins just attempted to murder our delegation in their quarters. This is a violation of every diplomatic protocol recognized by the Galactic Compact. The next act of aggression against our people will be answered by the full weapons complement of an Earth warship. I want to be clear. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact." Torvald did not respond for a long time. Jisiok delivered the killing blow, and he did it without raising his voice. He had been awake through the entire attack, recording everything through the sensor feeds that Yuna had hacked. He compiled the evidence, timestamps, heat signatures, corridor footage, biological readings from the fallen Valkai that identified them as Dominion military assets. And he transmitted the entire package to the Galhari Council observers, who were present at the summit as neutral witnesses. Within the hour, every observer on the station had seen the footage. Torvald's secret assassination attempt was no longer secret. And then Lyra did something extraordinary. The young translator walked into the official record chamber, alone, and formally entered the evidence into the Dominion's legal archive. She did this knowing it could cost her position, her standing, her safety. She did it because she had watched a young human woman stand in a dark corridor and fight 2 creatures 3 times her size, not because she was fearless, but because she had someone worth protecting. Lyra understood that kind of courage. By the time the station's lights brightened for the day cycle, Torvald was cornered. His assassination attempt had failed. His champion had been defeated in front of witnesses. His treachery was now part of the official record, and an Earth warship sat outside his station with its guns aimed at his head. He had no choice. He returned to the table. But this time, the humans were not the ones being measured. The grand atrium looked different in the morning. The black stone walls were the same. The high ceilings still vanished into shadow. The galleries were still filled with Galhari observers. But the feeling had changed. The air that had been thick with arrogance and amusement the day before was now heavy with something else. Uncertainty. The kind of silence that falls when an audience realizes the story is not going the way they were promised. Torvan's throne had been lowered. It was a small change, and the Galhari official who announced the adjustment called it a technical modification for acoustic purposes. But everyone in the room knew what it meant. The Supreme Mediator was no longer sitting above the human delegation. He was sitting at the same level, eye to eye. It was the smallest victory and the largest one at the same time. Dohyun sat on the human side of the negotiation table with his hands resting quietly on the surface. The cut on his forearm had been cleaned and wrapped by Yuna that morning. He had not complained about it. He had not even mentioned it. Beside him, Yuna sat with her back straight and her datapad in front of her, ready to provide any technical information the negotiation required. She looked calm. She looked like she belonged there. Because she did. Jisek stood and addressed the room. His Dohyun was the tiger and Yuna was the cub, then Jisek was the blade. He had waited for this moment his entire career. He had spent 20 years studying alien cultures, learning how power worked beyond Earth, understanding the thousand small ways that stronger species kept weaker ones under their feet. He had come to this station knowing exactly what the Galhari intended, and he had prepared for every possibility. Now, with Torvan's credibility in ruins, Jisek did not just negotiate peace. He rewrote the future. He spoke for 3 hours. His words were precise, each one chosen with the care of a surgeon selecting instruments. He presented the terms not as requests, but as realities. He cited Galactic Compact Law, which the Galhari had always used to justify their own expansions, and turned it back on them with a precision that made Torvan's legal advisors scramble through their own records. The treaty that emerged was not the one the Galhari had imagined. Full and immediate withdrawal of all Galhari military forces from human frontier colonies. A mutual non-aggression pact with verification protocols that would allow both sides to confirm compliance. Open trade route access through territories that the Galhari had previously blocked. And the centerpiece, the thing that would echo across the galaxy for decades, a formal recognition of humanity as a sovereign equal under Galactic Compact Law. Not a client species, not a subordinate. An equal. Torvan signed the treaty with all 4 hands, because Galhari law required it. His face showed nothing, but his mandibles clicked in a pattern that Yuna recognized from her studies. Frustration. Contained fury. The particular rage of someone who has lost a game they thought they had already won. It was done. But the story was not finished. During the recess that followed the signing, while Jisok was reviewing the final documents, and Sumi was coordinating the Baiko's departure preparations, something happened in a quiet corridor of the station that no official record would ever capture. Dren found Dohyun. The Valkai stood at the end of the hallway, motionless, his claws retracted, his massive body held in a posture that Yuna, who was walking with her father, immediately recognized. It was not an aggressive stance. It was not a hunting posture. It was the Valkai equivalent of standing with open hands. Vulnerability. A request to speak. Lyra was with him, small and nervous beside the towering predator, serving as translator. Dren spoke in his own language, a series of low, rumbling sounds that vibrated in the chest. Lyra translated, and her voice was soft. He says he has never lost before. Not in the arena, not in combat, not in anything. He was grown in a laboratory, engineered from birth to be a weapon. He was given his first kill before he could speak. He was told that combat was his purpose, that winning was his meaning, and that the day he lost would be the day he had no reason to exist. Dohyun listened in silence. He says that yesterday you defeated him. By everything he was taught, his life should be over. He should feel empty. But he does not feel empty. Lyra paused, and looked at Dren, who rumbled another series of sounds. He says that when you chose not to kill him, when you offered your hand, something changed inside him. He does not have a word for it. He only knows that for the first time, he wants to understand what he is, not what he was made to be. Do-hyun looked at the Valkyrie for a long time. He looked at the claws that could cut through metal. He looked at the armored hide that could stop a bullet. He looked at the deep-set eyes that were, for the first time, not the eyes of a predator. They were the eyes of someone lost. "You are not a weapon," Do-hyun said. "You never were. Someone just told you that before you were old enough to argue." Lyra translated. Dren stood perfectly still. Then slowly, a sound came from him that Lyra did not need to translate. It was quiet and rough, like stone grinding against stone, was the closest thing a Valkyrie had to a sigh. Yuna stepped forward. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small data chip. She held it up so Dren could see it. "This is everything I built during our journey here," she said. "A complete biological profile of Valkyrie physiology. Not for combat, for medicine. Your bone structure, your organ systems, your neural pathways. Things that could help your species build hospitals instead of arenas." She held it out to him. "Your species deserves doctors, not just generals." Dren looked at the chip. Then he looked at the young human woman who was offering it to him. She was small enough that he could close one hand around her entirely. She had fought two of his kind in the dark, and won. And now she was giving him a gift. Lyra later said that what happened next was the moment she decided that humans were the strangest and most frightening species in the galaxy. Not because of what they could destroy, but because of what they chose to build. Dren took the chip. He held it carefully as if it were something fragile and precious, which it was. It was the first gift anyone had ever given him. In his entire engineered existence, no one had ever offered him something that was not a weapon or a command. No one had ever looked at him and seen something worth healing. He looked at Yuna and said a single word in his own language. Lyra translated it as "thank you," but she said later that the actual meaning was closer to something like, "You have given me a new beginning, and I do not know what to do with it, but I will carry it." The human delegation departed an hour later. The final moment came in the grand atrium, as Do-hyun and his team walked toward the docking corridor for the last time. Torvald stood at the entrance, not blocking it, but present, watching. His forearms were folded, and his compound eyes tracked the humans with an expression that was impossible to read. As Do-hyun passed, Torvald spoke. "I have studied many species," he said, "conquered many worlds. I have faced warriors and kings, and creatures that could shatter planets. But I do not understand what you are." Do-hyun stopped. He turned and looked at the supreme mediator of the Galhari Dominion, the most powerful alien authority humanity had ever faced, and he answered. "We are human," he said. "We are the species that tamed wolves, rode horses into war, and then built shelters for both. We do not just hunt. We choose what is worth protecting, and when something threatens what we love, we do not send armies." He glanced at Yuna, who stood beside him with quiet, steady eyes. "We bring our children, and we teach them to be braver than we ever were." Torvald said nothing. There was nothing to say. The humans walked through the corridor of trophies one last time. Yuna noticed something as they passed. The space at the end of the hallway, the space that would have held humanity's trophy if the Galhari had won, was empty. It would stay that way. The Baiko pulled away from the station slowly, its engines humming with the deep vibration of controlled power. Captain Han Sumi guided the ship past the Valkyrie warship, which sat dark and silent in the dead star's shadow. No weapons locked, no challenge issued. Do-hyun stood at the observation deck, watching the station grow smaller. Yuna came and stood beside him. They watched the black structure shrink against the vast emptiness of space, growing smaller until it was just a dark point against a darker sky. "Do you think it will hold?" Yuna asked. "The piece?" Do-hyun was quiet for a moment. Then he put his hand on her shoulder, the way he had done since she was a child, since she was small enough to fit in the curve of his arm. And he said, "It does not matter if it holds. What matters is, they know. If it breaks, the tiger and his cub will come back." Yuna smiled. It was a small smile, warm, the same kind her father had given Torvon in the atrium. The kind of smile that alien translators could not categorize, because they had no word for what it meant. It meant that the cub was not a cub anymore, and the galaxy would remember. Far behind them, on the station orbiting the dead star, Dren stood alone at a viewing port. He held a small data chip in his massive clawed hand, and watched the human ship light up with the bright blue glow of its warp drive. The ship stretched, shimmered, and vanished into the stars. For the first time in his engineered life, the Valkai did not feel the urge to chase. He stood there for a long time, holding the gift the young human had given him, and he wondered what it would be like to choose.